Good morning, all of you. My name is Bhatia, and this is the class of BHIC 134. And we are going to cover in this class Unit 6 and Unit 7. Unit 7 and Unit 8. Unit 7 Colonial Economy, Trade and Industry. How the colonial government extend its economy and how they trade with the help of the industry at that time. As you all know, the British East India Company entered into India in 1600, and they had done a lot of things related, just like to extend their economy, just to trade with other countries and to trade with the Britain and all. And what was the structure of East India Company at that time? This is our first main topic: is structure of East India Company. What was the structure of East India Company over there? You must have observed that today business enterprise is dominated by companies which sell stocks, shares in order to raise the capital they need in business. These are joint stock companies as distinct from business, owned by a single proprietor or some proprietors in partnership. The East India Companies of Europe were some of the earliest joint stock companies in the world. This was the structure of British East India Company at that time when they established their control on trade, industry, and when they are going to establish their economy in India also. Next is East India Company's monopoly. How they monopoly in East India Company and how they had given lot of efforts to East India Company. Just another structural feature of English East India Company was that it was granted a monopoly by the government of England. What was meant by this monopoly and why did the government grant it? Monopoly, in a general sense, means the exclusive control of trade with India and and other countries on the Indian Ocean and further east up to China. In consequence, only the East India Company was legally entitled to trade with the above said countries. This was a legal right conferred upon the East India Company by Queen Elizabeth I in the first instance and later by other monarchs. Why did monarchs or governments do so in the 17th and 18th centuries? They gave this monopoly right to East India Company partly because it was commonly believed under the influence of mercantilist school of thought that the state must promote trade abroad to bring home wealth from foreign trade. Monopoly, they extend their monopoly on trade. Monopoly means the excessive control, the full control over there on trade at that time. They had given the monopoly on their trade, and when they will take any decision, then their decision will be obeyed by all the people on trade, on company, on extending economy over there. Next is monopoly versus free trade. What was the difference between monopoly and free trade? The monopoly privilege of East India Company came under attack in England. The doctrine of free trade promoted by economists like Adam Smith was inimical to monopolies. The capitalist excluded from Indian trade by the East India Company naturally lent support to campaign for free trade. Capital accumulating in England wanted freedom from restrictions on investment. Moreover, the ongoing industrial revolution brought to the force in merchandising and activities of the East India Company importing goods from India to England diminished in importance in comparison with industrial manufacturing in England. There were strong lobbies in Parliament pressing for the abolition of companies' monopoly. In these circumstances, the Charter Act of 1813 was passed, abolishing the monopoly in Indian trade Another Charter Act in 1839 abolished the remaining part of companies' privileged monopoly that in the China trade. After more than 200 years, the monopoly conferred on East India Company was taken away by the government. Next is the nature of companies trade. What was the nature of companies trade at that time? As you know already, the European East India Company main business was to procure certain commodities like spices, indigo, cotton cloth, etc. These were the things on which they wanted to trade and export them to Europe. Procurement of these goods in India initially took place under fairly competitive conditions. A 17th century English factory had generally to compete with local or country merchants and foreign traders including other European East India companies. In course of 18th century, the Englishman increasingly acquired position of advantage. Number 1, other European East India companies were marginalized. The military political victories of English East India Company took place. Number two, the weakness of successors, state, and principalities since the decline of Mughal Empire allowed the Indian East India Company to bully and bribe the local powers of grant European to grant Europeans special trade privileges. Next is artisans as well as peasants, like weavers and indigo growers, were sometimes subjected to coercive practice from the late decades of 18th century in order to procure goods in a cheap price or to persuade them to produce the goods for the company. Next is the mercantile business and political power. What was the how they extend their political power and how they mercantile their business over there in India. The evolution of English East India Company from the voyage system to factory system, from that to forts, and eventually to the position of a territorial power helped in business. It was not just a fit of absent mindedness and an aberration from the proper task of merchants that led to the political hegemony to the company that became the British Indian Empire. It was useful to have military power to back up coercion on the artisans, to produce goods at cheap price, to bully the local merchants, to make them subservient to English factors and private traders, and of course to eliminate and of course to eliminate other foreign merchants from competing with the English. Moreover, a military and territorial power could extract from the regional principalities and the local nobility protection money, bribes, etc., not to speak of plunder that were fair brought in finally control over territories brought in revenue. Mercantile business and political power. Next is rise of industrial capitalism and the company's mercantile policies, how they make their policies, how they mercantile their trade. And in England in 1750, about 40 to 45% of national income originated in the agricultural sector. After 100 years, by 1851, agriculture share diminished to 20%. And by 1881, it came down to about 10%. The contribution of foreign trade to England's national income was 14% in 1790. It increased to 36% by 1880s, and this helps us measure the rapid pace of industrialization in England. That country was transformed in the last half of 18th and early 19th century. As a result, industrial manufacture, foreign trade in manufacturers became the mainstay of English economy. In the particular, the growth of English cotton textile industry obviously meant an end to the demand for Indian cloth in England. On the contrary, based England was not seeking markets for her cotton textiles in, among other countries. India, moreover, to make industrial goods. England needed now more raw material than before, for example. England now, after her industrialization, would import raw cotton from, among other countries, India. That's why the whole basis of economic relationship between England and India was different after the industrialization of England compared to what it had been in the era of merchant capitalism. Next is deindustrialization, impact on indigenous industries. Deindustrialization means the British East India Company wanted to deindustrialize India. In the pre 1813 period, it was the excessive exploitation of Indian industrial sector, especially textile industry, by monopolistic East India Company, which led to progressive degeneration of this industry. Forcible reduction of purchase prices in India was resorted by the East India Company to increase the difference between its buying and selling price and consequently increase its trading profits. The import restrictions on Indian textiles in England further weakens this industry. The income of weavers and the spinners were drastically reduced, thereby restricting any possibility of capital accumulation and technological innovations in this traditional industrial sector. While India's traditional manufacturing sector was being steadily weakened under the company. In the same period, Britain had become its industrial revolution and was rapidly expanded its industries by revolutionizing its technology as well as organization along principles of capitalist production. The growing British textile industry had all the advantages which were denied to its Indian counterpart. The British industry had a rapidly developing technological base. It had the advantage of economies of scale, and finally, it was carefully protected in its formativeness years from foreign competition. Next is Unit 8. In Unit 7, we have studied a lot of things related how the colonial government establishes trade and how they monopoly their trade on Indian company. How they monopoly their on their trade. Next, how they monopoly and how they free trade on the particular area, just like they wanted to deindustrialize the Indian agriculture sector, Indian industry sector, and all. They wanted to destroy and they wanted to exploit each peasant and each company over in India. Next is what was the nature of companies trade over there? The company wanted to extract the monopoly on indigo plantation, cotton plantation, and the spices. They wanted to monopoly on these three four things just because these three four crops were giving so much demand in Britain, and they wanted to make the prices of indigo, cotton, cloth, and the spices. They wanted to make the prices very low, just because the Indians will not grow these type of clothes, these type of plants over there, and they will destroy their agriculture sector over in India. That's why. And next, the mercantile business and the political power. They use their political power and they extend their business because when it was the industrial revolution timing was running over there, then the England industries were set up. The industries were set up in England, and England was growing its development and very rapidly. So this type of effect was on India industrial sector at that time, and that was the main effect of industrial revolution in England, in Britain at that time. Next, the rise of industrial capitalism, and they wanted to extend their capital and they wanted to mercantile their company and their policies over there. Next, deindustrialization. and the impact of indigenous industry. What was the impact of indigenous industry? Our indigenous industry was the main thing was agriculture sector, and Britishers wanted to exploit these agriculture sector, and they wanted to commercialize all agriculture things, just like cotton, just like indigo. They wanted to commercialize all these things just to make them benefit. Only they wanted benefit on them, and they did not want any type of reliabilism over there in with Indians. That's why the deindustrialization sector was over there. Next, in Unit 8, what we will study about economic impact of colonial rule. What was the economic impact of colonial rule? Colonial means the British government, the government of Britain over there, and this was a time when we are talking about 17th century and 18th century. That time the colonial government was running over there, and the colonial government, British East India Company, only the company that was running its government over there, and other companies, they were not having that much rights at that time, and so they had so many privileges, and they had given its monopoly on trade and all business activities, export, import, market, shipping, and all things, they had monopoly on them. Colonialism created a society which was neither capitalist as in Britain, nor was it pre-colonial or pre-capitalist. That's why, for example, India under British rule neither resembled capitalist Britain, nor was it basically similar to Mughal India. Not on capitalist based and not like Mughal India. The development of agrarian relations in India makes this aspect quite clear. For example, landlordism in both Jamidari and Riyotwari areas of British India was something new. It did not exist in Mughal India. What does not exist in Mughal India? Jamidari and the Riyotwari settlement. It was a creation of British rule only. It was the result of colonial rulers and efforts to transform Indian agriculture. Indian agriculture was not capitalist, but it had many capitalist elements. For example, property relations were capitalist. Land was now a private property which was freely bought and sold on a large scale. Okay, that was a condition of land over there, and that was the property relations over there at that time when the colonial government was running in India, and on agriculture sector, on an industrial sector, and all these things. Next, we had distributed the colonial rule in three stages. First of all, the first stage, and second stage, and third stage. After that, the impact of colonial government on Indian industries, on Indian markets, we will see over there. The first stage of colonialism, the first was to acquire a monopoly of trade with India. Monopoly of trade, I told you earlier, monopoly means the extend control, the control over there, all of control over there on trade. Acquire a monopoly of trade with India. This meant, what was the meaning of this? That other English or European merchants or trading companies should not compete with it in purchase and sale in Indian products, nor should the Indian merchants do so. This would enable the East India Company to buy Indian products as cheaply as possible and sell them in world markets as high a price as possible. That's why India was exploited through monopoly trade. Yes, this was the sharpness of East India Company. What was the sharpness? The East India Company bought Indian products very cheaply and sell them in world market in a very high price. That was the exploitation, the main exploitation, and this was the monopoly on trade. The English competitors were kept out by persuading the British government to grant the English East India Company through a royal charter. Royal charter means the The Charter Act, which was given by the British government, Royal Charter, a monopoly of right to trade with India and the East. Just like India and China, they had monopoly on trade. Against European rivals, the company had to wage long and fierce wars on land and the sea to acquire monopoly against Indian traders and to prevent Indian rulers from interfere with its trade. The company took advantage of the disintegration of the Mughal Empire. After political conquest, Indian weavers were also employed directly by the company. In that case, they were forced to produce clothes at below market prices. Next is the second major objective of colonialism at this stage was to directly appropriate or take over governmental revenues through control over state. Means they had given control on the state and they had the revenue powers to collect over the state. The East India Company required large financial resources to wage wars in India and on the sea against European rivals and Indian rulers and to maintain naval forts, armies around their trading posts, etc. East India Company did not possess such resources. The much needed financial resources had therefore to be raised in Indian from the Indian politics over there. Next is second stage of colonialism, how they had made their stages on colonialism and on the trade system. The agrarian structure of India was sought to be transformed in a capitalist direction through the permanent settlement and the Ryotwari settlements. The large scale imports and their sale in land, and even more, the large scale export of bulky raw materials and their gathering at the ports from long distance inside the country required a cheap and easy system of transport and communications. The government therefore improved rivers, canals, encouraged the introduction of steamships on the rivers, and improved the roads also. Above all, during later half of 19th century, it encouraged and financed a large network of railways linking India's major cities and major markets to its port. By 1905, nearly 45,000 kilometers of railways had been built, 4,500. Similarly, a modern postal and telegraph system was introduced to facilitate economic transactions. The earlier form of exploitation continued during this phase. This plus the costly administration plus the efforts at economic transformation led to a steep rise in taxation and in burden on peasant. Because of the constant needs of colonial administration for funds to maintain military and civil administration, and for construction of railways, its large reliance on taxation of land, which had its own limits, colonial administration suffered from constant financial constraint. Next is third stage of colonialism. These were the stages just like this is described as the era of foreign investment and international competition for colonies. A new stage of colonialism was assured in India from about 1860s. This was a result of several major changes in the world. What was in economy? In economy, if we are talking about number one, spread of industrialization to several countries of Europe. Spread of industrialization to several countries of Europe, the United States and Japan, with the result that Britain's industrial supremacy in the world came to an end. Next is there was intensification of industrialization as a result of application of scientific knowledge to industry. Modern chemical industries, the use of petroleum as fuel for the internal combustion engine, and the use of electricity for industrial purpose developed during this period. There was further unification of the world market because of revolution in the means of international transport. Those were the three stages of colonialism. If you're talking in first stage, they monopoly on trade. They wanted to establish its control on trade, and they had given the Royal Charter on of 1813 and 1833. They had given the Charter Act of 1813 and 1833, and they monopoly on trade, and they took advantage of this integration of Mughal Empire. And the East India Company required large financial resources to wage wars in India. These were the main objectives of the first stage of colonialism. And what about the second stage of colonialism? Means the agrarian structure of India. They had settled. They had given on agrarian settlement. What was given? The permanent settlement, which was shown to for the permanent, and the tax was decided. The tax was decided that how much tax will be given by the peasants and taken by the jamidars. This was a permanent settlement. And what is reotwari settlement? They had given such settlement just like they had taken a variety of tax, and they have taken the riots, the taxation from the riots over there. Sale and purchase of land was given right to the industrial industries and the British East India Company, and the government improved rivers and canals, and they improved so many things just for their for fulfillment of their purpose, not the fulfillment of us. And they had given the railway line near about 45,000 kilometers railway line they had given, and so that the modern postal telegraph system was introduced. And taxation, they use taxation for these type of activities and these type of development. Okay, they use taxation. Next, the third stage of colonialism means the spread of industrialization to several countries, just like Europe, US, Japan. These type of industrialization they had settled, and unification of the world market. Okay, these were the stages of third stage colonialism. Next, we are going to cover the economic critic of colonialism by nationalists. How the critics has had criticized the economic system of British East India Company by the nationalists. Through the works of Dadabhai Naoroji, Mahadev Govind Ranade, Ramesh Chandra Dutt, and many others who developed a school of economic nationalist analysis, which highlighted some important features of India's experience under British rule. What type of things they were discussing over there? Number one, the concept of drain of wealth. What was the drain of wealth theory? That is very important for all of you. You will have to learn these type of questions just like they will come into your exam. Just like drain of wealth theory. The drain of wealth evolved in the writings of the Naroji and Dutt. To them, it means the transfer of wealth from the late 18th century in the form of plunder, in the form of loot, and in the form of illicit gains by servants of East India Company, and in the form of home charges, the expenses incurred by Government of India in England out of its income derived mainly from the taxation of Indian people, and finally in the form of interest, in the form of profits and capital transfer from India to England on private account. This is known as drain of wealth theory. Okay, the drain of wealth from India to England. Drain means the wealth is going to England from India. Wealth was money, capital. This drain of informs impoverished this country and increased the economic gap between India and England. They also pointed out how British regime brought about the destruction of small scale industries of India. The rate of taxation of agriculture was also criticized by R.C. Dutt, which were subjected to periodical temporary settlements. This, in his opinion, was cause of frequent recurrence of famines in British India. When the Britishers were living in India at that time in 18th and 19th century, uh, the back-to-back famines held in India at that time. Wealth of the countryside was drained away through the revenue collection machinery, making the economic viability of farming so precious that the farmer could not withstand any natural calamity. Finally, an important part of the nationalist analysis of British economic policy in India was their criticism of government, expenditure on army, and the police and the other apparatus of government. Next was the economic effect of colonial rule. What was the economic effect means? First of all, the economic effect means that the Britishers had drained our wealth from India to England. If we need to write on one line on one mark, then we write over there like this. The economic effect of colonial rule means the deindustrialization. And what was the deindustrialization? Destruction of traditional Indian industries was one of the earliest consequences of colonialism to be noticed and documented in India. In that early stage of mercantile capitalism, the source of profit of East India Company was the difference between the cost prices in India and the sale prices in England of Indian industrial products like cotton and silk industries. Cotton and silk industries. Next is cotton and silk industries. This price was no. Yes, Indian industrial products like cotton and silk industries. This price different, just like the profit rates of English East India Company could be increased if the Indian cost price at which East India Company purchased goods from Indian artisans could be lowered. So long as the East India Company was competing in Indian market with other countries of the French or the Dutch and with other merchants of Indian and Asian origin, the Indian artisans were in a good bargaining position. But in the last decade of 18th century, the British gradually eliminated most of their competitors, in particular the French and the Dutch. Moreover, by virtue of their military power and in some regions their political and administrative position, the British established a hegemony which allowed them to become monopolists in the market. Next, the English East India Company purchased together with the purchase of servants of that company in their private capacity, accounted for a very large portion of the marketed textiles of superior quality in Bengal. As we all know, a monopolist can influence the market to his own advantage. Okay, his own advantage. In the last three decades of 18th century, this was the advantage which enabled the English traders to reduce the prices paid to indigenous artisans in India, and that's why to reap high profits from sale in European market. This excessive exploitation Indian artisans weakened the very basis of our handicraft industry by reducing the artisan to a low level of income. It also destroyed the possibility of accumulation of resources to invest in the industry and to improve its technology. As we know, accumulation of capital and technological revolution occurred in England in last decades of 18th century and early decades of 19th century. This industrial revolution first of all wiped out the market for Indian artisans in Europe. It was impossible for artisanal products to compete with factory products. By the beginning of 19th century, the staple industrial exports, cotton textiles, began to decline and soon They ceased to be exported. Famines in colonial India. Famines, the lack of food, the lack of the essential things, lack of food. The cost of food was getting very high. That is the famines. As for the early 50 years, the repeated occurrence famines tell their own story. From the middle of 19th century, a number of famines devastated India. According to official estates in these famines, the total loss of life was at least 1 crore and 52 lakh. The total number of infected people was at 97 crores. These vast numbers indicate of subsistence crisis facing subsistence crisis. The immediate cause for this undoubtedly was droughts and crop failure, but the roots of crisis lay in what was the normal rate of agrarian production. The factors that contributed to famines were stagnation of agricultural technology, failure of investment, and to raise yield per year, the trade of agricultural resources in hands of revenue intermediaries and money and dealers in agricultural commodities. The sparseness of government investment in irrigation and other developmental investments and the rapid rise of population from 1920s were also responsible for the famines. Next is commercialization of agriculture. In this topic, we are going to study about how the Britishers commercialized our agriculture at that time. The emancipation of black slaves by Abraham Lincoln and the consequent civil war in USA led to a massive shortfall in the world supply of cotton in 1860 to 1864. This led to increase in cotton prices, export of cotton from India. Okay. And the growth on cotton cultivating occur in India. This cotton boom brought the Indian peasants in cotton growing areas within the ambit of world capitalist system. The important export houses of Bombay, the wholesale traders in the big cities, the brokers and other middlemen in cotton export trade down to level of the village bania who advance credit to the peasant for cotton cultivation. All profited enormously from cotton boom. This profit, as well as the profit from commercial crops, developed even earlier, like opium, indigo, contributed to the accumulation of capital in the hands of some Indian businessmen. More important was the fact that the cotton boom marked the recruitment of India as a supplier of agricultural commodities and raw material needed by the industrialized West. This has complemented the process of deindustrialization, we can say. The role of colony specializing in agriculture and of industrialized country in the West were democrated clearly in the contemporary theory of international division of labor. This was characteristic not only of India and England but also of other colonies and imperialist countries also. This was the commercialization of agriculture at that time. Next, what was the impact of commercialization on rural society? Impact of commercialization means when the East Indian Company commercialized all the things on trade, just like merchant activities, just like trade activities, activities just like export, import. These type of activities they had commercialized, and the impact of these commercialization things on rural society. What was that? Yes, commercialization of agriculture paved the way for the generation of usury and merchant capital in rural society and widened the levels of differentiation among the peasantry. The common cultivators' dependence on the village bania for advance of credit increased, and the peasant needed credit for marketing of his crop, for loans during lean sessions, for substance increased as commercialization progressed. In the payment of land revenue, also, the money lender cum trader played an important role in supplying cash. Finally, the village bania was also an agent for the penetration of rural market by the imported industrial consumer goods, particularly Manchester cloth. That after that time means when the peasant was not having that much money for the repayment of loan and for the for agriculture things, just to spend more and more money to collect the things which were on helpful on agriculture at that time. Then they went to bania to gain the loan from that bania, village bania, and the village bania had given the loan to the particular peasant, and the peasant was having so much activities on agriculture and all. And these type of things they were increased as commercialization progressed at that time. Who they? The British East India Company. While some of the poor peasants were raising crops for the market, virtually hypothetical in advance to the moneylender, the better off section of peasantry was relatively free at that time. The latter could store their goods and wait for better prices than what prevailed during the glut in the market after harvest. They could also cart their crops to markets in town to obtain a better price than what the village bania or itinerant dalal offered. Furthermore, they could make their own decision as to which crop to grow, while the poorest farmer was virtually forced to raise crops as they demanded by the village bania. In some regions, the rich peasants themselves became moneylenders to poorer peasants, and that's why the process of differentiation was accentuated. Means they were doing these type of activities over there. And what was the role of village bania and what was the role of peasants at that time? Village bania role was very good at that time, because when the peasants wanted to grow the crops and they had no money, then they went to village bania to collect some money, and when they collect that money, then they expand them, then they sell that money to purchase all the things related to the agriculture, and they wanted to raise his agriculture, and the British East India Company wanted to commercialize that type of things related to peasant and village bania. Next is modern industry and Indian capitalist class. What was the modern industry and what was the Indian capitalist class at that time? Indian capitalist class within a colonial context, the growth of national capital was obviously subject to severe limitations. The potentialists of colonial industrial development were exceedingly limited. Yes, from Shiva Subramaniam's estimates of national income, it is clear now how small was the extent of industrial growth even in the last 50 years of British rule. On the average, the ratio of industrial sector's share to the net domestic product was 12.7% in 1900 to 1904, 13 to 6% in 1915 to 1919, and 16 to 16.7% in 1940 to 1944. This was the increase in the industrial sector's share to net domestic product. That India virtually remained where it was predominantly agricultural is clear from the ratio of income generated in the primary sector to the total NDP. 63.6% in 1900 to 1904, 59.6% in 1915 to 1990, 47.6% in 1940 to 1944. Next, the tertiary sector alone show a striking increase in its share. Striking increase. This was the increment. 23.7% in 1900 to 1904 compared to 35.7% in 1940 to 1944. Yes, this was the striking increment of the money, of the share. In common with many other colonial and industrially backward countries, India was characterized by stagnation in the level of national income. In the early years of British rule, we have no index of national income. In the India was rupees 20 per annum. No, we have skipped one line. In the 1860s, according to Dadabhai Naoroji's calculation, the per capita income of India was rupees for 20 per annum. Very less this was. We have already seen how Dadabhai Naoroji and the others nationalists identified the drain of wealth from India as one of the causes of this poverty in India. This was a type of poverty, means the drain of wealth theory from India to England. About this time, 1870 to be exact, the per capita income in England. The per capita income in England was 24.4 sterling. This was equivalent to rupees 568. And that was a much difference between 20 and 568. 20 and 24.4 euro, and 24.4 euro, if it is connected to Indian currency, then rupees 568 rupees. Now you can see the difference between these things. In India, 20 per annum, and in England, 24.4 sterling euro per annum. If we are talking about this, we have studied a lot of things related to so many things, just like how the Britishers expand its income, how the Britishers expand its capital while living in India, and how they extend its income on the agriculture sector mainly on indigo, cotton and opium, how they increase their production of these type of commercial crops, because these type of commercial crops had given a lot of profit to British East India Company. That's why they had given so many efforts on these things, just like when they went to sell these things into the market of England, not into market of India. And they had taken a lot of things from India to they had taken off to England. And that's why this thing is known as the drain of wealth theory. Drain of wealth theory means all the scholars and all the thinkers had accepted these things, that they had taken a lot of things from India and they had given to Britain. These type of things we have studied about drain of wealth theory. And what was the impact of commercialization on rural society? Then in rural society, you can understand the people and the peasant of that particular rural area they were not that much aware of the important things, just like they were not that much educated. And the condition of peasants were very poor at that time, and they had given a lot of taxes to British East India Company, and the Britishers had taken a lot of profit from the peasants. And commercialization of agriculture, mainly two or three, just like cotton and just like opium, just like indigo. and just like spices, those type of things, they wanted to extend. They wanted to produce more and more plantation of these type of crops, and they wanted to give to England and these type of things. Just like cotton, at the time of industrial revolution, two types of revolution had run over there, just like industrial revolution and the civil war in USA. And at the time of civil war in USA, and USA was giving was exporting so much cotton to England. And at the time of civil war in USA, the military and the all people were involved in civil war. That's why the Britain had not got so much cotton as they were getting over there. And the Britain had given loan just like 100 rupees or 200 rupees to the peasant of Indian just to grow more and more cotton. And they had grown, and when they got the money, then they got very happy at that time. And after getting happy, and they had they had given a lot of efforts to their agriculture, and they had produced so much cotton, and they export cotton to England at that time. So the requirement of cotton in England was fulfilled over there. And when the American Civil War, the Civil War in USA was getting down and was over, and same thing was getting happen over there. The USA had started giving cotton to England at that time. And when those type of situation were held over there, and then India was over. The production was getting very slow, and the peasant was not getting income over there, was not getting that much profit on cotton plantation. That was the bad effect of Indian cotton production over there. Yes, next, which we were talked about the famines. Famines over there, back-to-back famines were held over there. Just like loss of life. Loss of life was near about 1 crore 52 lakh. And the total number of famine affected people was 39.7 crores. What was the indication of these type of news? These vast numbers indicate periods of subsistence crisis. The Indians were facing over that time. The immediate cause for this undoubtedly was droughts and the crop failure. And after the crop failure, the British East India Company was asking for the tax revenue system. That thing also very big cause after the famines. Normal rate of agrarian production. The factors that contributed to famine were stagnation in agriculture technology, failure of investment to raise yield per acre, the drain of agriculturist resources into the hands of revenue intermediaries and money lenders and dealers in agricultural commodities. Next, we have talked about the when British East India Company purchased together with the purchase of servants of that company in their private capacity accounted for a very large portion of marketed textiles of superior quality in Bengal. The advantage which enabled the English traders to reduce the price paid to indigenous artisans in India, and that's why to reap high profits from sale in the European markets, not in Indian market but in European markets. This excessive exploitation of India artisan weakened the very basis of our handicraft industries by reducing the artisan to a low level of income. It also destroyed possibility of accumulation of resources to invest in the industry and to improve its technology. As we know, the accumulation of capital and a technological revolution occurred in England in the last decade of 18th and early decade of 19th century. That things we have studied about the economic effects and colonial rule. The main thing of the economic effect was deindustrialization. Means deindustrialization means the destruction of traditional Indian industries. This was one of the earliest consequences of colonialism. One of the earliest consequences of colonialism to be noticed and documented in India. In that early stage of mercantile capitalism, the source of profit of East India Company was the difference between the cost price in India and the sale price in England of Indian industrial products like cotton and silk textiles. This price difference, like the profit rates of English East India Company, could be increased if the Indian cost price at which East India Company purchased goods from the Indian artisans, and that could be lowered at that time. So long as the English East India Company was competing in the Indian market with other companies of French or Dutch and with other merchants of Indian and Asian origin, the Indian artisans were in a good bargaining position. Next, the RC Dutt, the rate of taxation of agriculture. The rate of taxation of agriculture was also criticized by RC Dutt, who felt that the burden of land revenue was excessive in areas which were subjected to periodical temporary settlements. This, in his opinion, was the cause of frequent recurrence of famines in British India, which we have discussed. Wealth of countryside was drained away through the revenue collection machinery, making the economic viability of farming so precarious that the farmer could not withstand any natural calamity. Next, what was the economic critic of colonialism by the nationalists? So many nationalist leaders, just like scholars, just like Dadabhai Nauroji, Mahadev Govind Ranade, and Ramesh Chandra Dutt, which is known as R.C. Dutt, and many others who developed a school of economic nationalist analysis, which highlighted some important features of India's experience under British rule. The concept, yes, we have studied earlier, the concept of drain of wealth evolved in the writings of Nehruji and Arti Dutt. To them, it means the transfer of wealth from the late 18th century in the form of plunder, in the form of loot and the illicit gains by servants of East India Company, and in the form of home charges, expenses incurred by the government of India in England out of its income derived mainly from the taxation of Indian people, and finally in the form of interest, profits, capital transfer from India to England on a private account. This was known as drain of wealth theory. We have studied the three stages of colonialism. At the first stage, the British East India Company had acquired a monopoly on trade with India. In the second stage, we have studied about the large scale imports, the permanent settlements, the Riotwari settlements, and the Mahalwari settlement also there in Bengal, in Maharashtra, and in Orissa. These type of settlements they had done in India at that time, just to decide about the taxation which they bought, which they collected from Indians at that time. And in the third stage, and the when the colonialism third stage was running over there, then they spread of industrialization to several countries of Europe, United States, Japan, with the result that Britain industrial supremacy in the world came to an end. And there was intensification of industrialization as a result of application of scientific knowledge of industry, modern chemical industries, use of petroleum and as fuel for the internal combustion engine, and the use of electricity for industrial purposes developed during this period. And there was further unification of the world market because of revolution in the means of international transport. Now, in our next class, we will study about Unit 9 and Unit 10. Just we have studied a lot of things related to the economy, trade, and so many other things we have studied in this class. And in our next class, we will study about Unit 9 and Unit 10, because we have done Unit 11 also, and our Unit 9 and 10 are left. So in our next class, we will study Unit 9 and Unit 10. That is very interesting and very important for all of you. Thank you and have a nice day.